The brick building stood silent under a London drizzle. My heart, a frantic drum in my chest, told me this was it. The moment of truth, a joyous reunion I'd dreamt of for weeks. I pressed the doorbell. Once. The silence that followed was louder than any alarm, a hollow, echoing void that whispered the first real doubt into my mind. 'Cause no one answered. My name is Karen Sullivan, and for a long time I believed I was building a future with a man I loved. Turns out I was just funding a fantasy. A very expensive fantasy. Before we dive into the story, tell me, where are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments. This is how it all began. That insistent, echoing silence from the London apartment building was still a whisper in my ears, even now, as I thought back to the very beginning. My beginning with Daniel. I was 45 then, a landscape altered by emotional earthquakes. The past decade had been a brutal master class in heartbreak and disillusionment. A particularly devastating separation had left me feeling like a stripped-down house, sturdy in its foundation perhaps, but with every window shattered and every door unhinged. I wasn't actively looking for love. The very idea felt like a cruel joke. I was simply trying to regrout the tiles of my life, to find some semblance of peace, to build a future that felt authentically mine, uncomplicated by the messy narratives of another person. And then Daniel walked in. He was 32, a vibrant splash of color in my muted world. We met at a charity gala, introduced by a mutual friend who insisted we'd just click. I remember him across the room, leaning against a velvet rope, a glass of champagne in hand. His head thrown back in a laugh that seemed to carry across the chatter. His charisma wasn't a performance. It was an innate aura, drawing people in, making them feel seen, heard, important. When he finally approached, his eyes, bright and earnest, held mine for a beat too long, and I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years: hope. He was polite, almost deferential, with a sharp wit that kept me on my toes. He remembered small details I'd mentioned, a passing comment about a book, a fleeting opinion on a piece of art. He listened with an intensity that made me feel like the most fascinating person in the room. This attentiveness, this genuine curiosity, was a balm to my weary soul. But what truly captivated me was his ambition. It wasn't a ruthless, cutthroat kind of drive, but a passionate, almost romantic vision of the future. He spoke of studying abroad, of changing his life, of leaving his mark on the world, and he spoke of it all with an intensity that was intoxicating. He dreamt of a master's degree in international relations, a path he believed would lead him to a career in global nonprofits, making a tangible difference. He painted vibrant pictures of his future, a tapestry woven with purpose and grand possibilities. After the quiet devastations of my past, where promises had crumbled into dust, Daniel felt like a solid promise. He talked about building something real, something lasting, with a sincerity that resonated deep within me. He was mature beyond his years, or so I believed. His youthful energy tempered by an old soul wisdom, or so it seemed. Our conversations flowed effortlessly, from art to politics, from dreams to fears. The first year of our relationship unfolded like a beautiful, carefully orchestrated ballet. Dinners at quiet bistros, long walks in autumn parks, weekend trips to the coast that felt like mini adventures. He was consistently attentive, affectionate, always present, always available. He'd send me thoughtful little notes, leave unexpected flowers on my doorstep. I remember one evening, after a particularly trying day at work, he simply showed up at my door with my favorite takeout and a silly movie, insisting I just relax. Felt like he genuinely understood me, truly saw me. I felt a sense of security, a calm certainty, that I hadn't experienced in too long. My friends adored him, my family warmed to his easy charm, and I allowed myself to believe, truly believe, that this was it. This was the love I'd waited for. A second chance at a future I had thought was lost to me. We talked about everything, our histories, our families, our hopes. His parents, Richard and Margaret Whitmore, seemed like salt-of-the-earth people, quiet and hardworking, a stark contrast to Daniel's outward vivacity. He always spoke of them with respect, but also with a subtle yearning to break free from the small-town life they represented. Then came London. He'd mentioned a master's program almost from the beginning, a long-held dream to study at a prestigious university overseas. It was always when he went, not if. He'd researched the programs meticulously, obsessed over application deadlines, and spoke with reverence about the London School of Economics. When the acceptance letter finally arrived, a thick, heavy envelope adorned with an unfamiliar crest, his excitement was palpable. He paced my living room, phone pressed to his ear, his voice a mixture of elation and disbelief. I remember watching him, genuinely thrilled for him, my heart swelling with pride. This was his dream, a testament to his intelligence and relentless drive, and I felt a deep satisfaction in witnessing his joy. But soon, the elation gave way to a familiar apprehension. Cost. The tuition alone was staggering, and then there was the exorbitant London rent, the daily expenses in a city renowned for its price tag. His excitement began to wane, his shoulders slumping under the imagined weight of the financial burden. He started to pull back, his enthusiasm tempered by a palpable anxiety. "It's too much, Karen," he'd sigh, running a hand through his hair, his brow furrowed with genuine worry. "Maybe it's just not meant to be right now. I should postpone, save up for a year or two." He spoke of finding a second job, of putting his dream on hold, and I saw the bright spark dimming in his eyes. The ambitious glow, usually so vibrant, began to flicker, threatening to extinguish altogether. It broke my heart to see him so defeated, to watch a dream that had fueled him for so long begin to slip away. It was in one of those moments, watching him wrestle with his dreams, his gaze distant and troubled, that the words just tumbled out of me. Almost without thinking, driven by a powerful urge to protect his happiness, to preserve our shared vision. "Go," I said, my voice firmer than I expected, filled with a conviction that surprised even myself. "I'll help you with whatever you need." My own savings, accumulated over years of diligent work and frugal living, suddenly seemed less like a nest egg and more like a tool, a means to an end, a way to build this future we shared. I truly believed we were in this together, two people committed to each other's success and happiness, navigating life's challenges as a team. His face, etched with worry moments before, transformed. His eyes widened, a flicker of hope returning, then pure, unadulterated gratitude. He embraced me tightly, whispering thanks into my hair, telling me I was his angel, his savior, the only person who truly understood him. Felt like the right thing to do, the loving thing to do. And so I helped. For an entire year, I became his silent benefactor, his invisible support system. Every month, a wire transfer for €3,000 left my account, flowing across the Atlantic to cover his rent, his food, his transportation, his university fees. He sent me detailed breakdowns, meticulous spreadsheets even, listing every expense, every receipt, making it all seem meticulously managed and utterly legitimate. He was so organized, so transparent. I worked extra shifts at the design firm, took on freelance projects, tightened my own belt to a degree I hadn't thought possible. My once generous dining budget dwindled, new clothes became a distant luxury, and evenings out were replaced by quiet nights at home. Every sacrifice, every penny sent, felt like an investment in our future, in the foundation of the life we would build together once he returned. I imagined him walking across a graduation stage, cap and gown, the proud culmination of our shared effort. Our communication became a lifeline, a digital tether across continents. We talked by video almost every night, despite the 5-hour time difference. He was always in his small, modest apartment, or what I believed was his apartment, always positioned in front of a plain white wall. The same white wall, day in and day out, became a familiar backdrop to our distant intimacy. He'd tell me about his classes, the demanding professors, the stacks of books that threatened to topple, the endless research papers. He'd complain about the biting London cold, the persistent drizzle, the sheer volume of reading. But then, his eyes would light up as he described a beautiful park he discovered near campus, a quaint little pub with excellent ale, or a fascinating lecture by a visiting scholar. He painted vivid pictures of his life there, a life of relentless dedication, of intellectual pursuit, of new experiences in a vibrant, historic city. "I'm working so hard, Karen," he'd say, his voice thick with what I perceived as genuine exhaustion and profound gratitude. "You have no idea how much this means to me. Plus, this is all for our future." And I believed him. Every word. Felt real. Felt like love. The intimacy, despite the distance, felt genuine, sustained by daily connection and shared dreams. But underneath the comforting routine, beneath the surface of shared dreams and daily updates, something subtle began to shift. It was nothing I could point to, no glaring red flag, just a faint, almost imperceptible tremor. Sometimes, after a particularly long conversation, when the screen went dark and the digital connection severed, a cold sensation would prickle at the back of my neck, a whisper of unease. He was so convincing, so earnest, so entirely absorbed in his London life. Too absorbed, perhaps. The constant exhaustion, the stories of endless study, the very predictable white wall backdrop. They were all perfectly consistent, almost too perfect. Could it just be the distance, the strain of being apart, making me hypersensitive? Or was it the lingering shadows of past betrayals, making me wary where I should have been trusting? I tried to rationalize it away, dismissing it as insecurity, as the ghost of past hurts attempting to resurface and poison a good thing. I told myself it was simply the stress of our separate lives, the geographical chasm between us. But the quiet hum of discomfort, like a low, persistent frequency, refused to be entirely silenced. It lurked in the periphery, a shadow just out of sight, a question I couldn't quite articulate, yet couldn't entirely ignore. It was the faintest crack in the seemingly impenetrable facade of our perfect long-distance love. The quiet hum of discomfort, that low, persistent frequency I'd felt after some of our video calls, grew louder as the months stretched on. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly, a shifting in the rhythm of our communication. The daily video calls, once a comforting ritual, started to become sporadic. First it was just missing one night, then two. Daniel's excuses were always plausible, delivered with an air of genuine regret. "My Wi-Fi is acting up, Karen, it's terrible, I can barely connect." Or, "I'm buried in library work, literally living here, signal's a nightmare." I tried to shrug it off, to believe him wholeheartedly. London was a big city. Old buildings had notoriously bad internet, and master's programs were demanding. I'd experienced it myself in my own college days, though not with the same level of detachment Daniel was beginning to exhibit. Then the gaps widened. Sometimes he'd disappear for 2, 3, even 4 days at a time. My messages would remain undelivered, or worse, delivered and unread. My calls would go straight to voicemail. Each unanswered ping, each unheard ring, felt like a tiny pinprick, slowly deflating the balloon of trust one had so carefully inflated. When he finally re-emerged, usually with a flurry of apologetic texts. "So sorry, love, my phone died, charger was lost, then my landlord started major building work, no signal at all." He'd sound genuinely exhausted, almost frantic. He'd explain away the silence with elaborate tales of broken internet, lost phones, and insurmountable academic pressure. He spoke of being constantly on the move, chasing stable Wi-Fi signals in cafes or university common rooms, juggling deadlines, living on coffee and adrenaline. His usual backdrop, that plain white wall, became less frequent. Sometimes he'd be outside, shivering and bundled up, claiming he was just grabbing a breath of fresh air between study sessions. The visual evidence of his struggle, the dark circles under his eyes, the slightly disheveled hair, the weariness in his voice. It all reinforced the narrative he was spinning. I wanted so desperately to believe him, to dismiss the churning in my stomach as mere anxiety born of distance and my own past traumas. My rational mind fought hard against my gut, constructing elaborate defenses for him. He's stressed. He's overwhelmed. He's trying his best under immense pressure. I reminded myself of his ambition. His passion, the dream I was helping him achieve. He loved me, didn't he? He wouldn't lie. Not to me. But the intuition, that primal, unwavering inner voice, refused to be silenced. Screamed. Not a loud, hysterical shriek, but a persistent low-frequency hum that vibrated through my bones. Something was wrong. Terribly, fundamentally wrong. It wasn't just the sporadic communication. It was a subtle shift in his tone, a certain guardedness in his eyes that I noticed even through the grainy video calls. He seemed less engaged, less interested in my day, always steering the conversation back to his own challenges, his own struggles, his own need for support. The intimacy we once shared felt like a thin veil, translucent and fragile. The 1-year anniversary of his departure for London loomed, a date I had marked on my calendar with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. It was meant to be a milestone, a celebration of his progress and our enduring love. But instead of joy, it brought a suffocating dread. The last 3 weeks had been particularly sparse in communication. 5 days without a word, then a brief text. Another 4 days of silence. The excuses grew thinner, more flimsy. My imagination, once his greatest advocate, began to turn against him, painting scenarios I desperately wanted to deny. And that's when the idea came to me, sharp and sudden like a crack of lightning. What if I visited him? Not just a visit, but a surprise. A grand gesture. It would be perfect. I'd show up, throw my arms around him, remind him that I was here, that the effort, the distance, the financial strain, it was all worth it. It would re-energize him, bring back the spark. And in a quiet corner of my mind, it would silence that screaming intuition once and for all. It was an act born of love, yes, but also of a desperate need for confirmation, for reassurance that my faith hadn't been misplaced. I bought the ticket in secret. A red-eye flight direct to Heathrow. I told my friends I was going on a solo retreat, needed time to clear my head. My boss thought I was taking a much-needed vacation. No one suspected a thing. I packed a small bag, carefully selecting an outfit I knew he loved, a dress that always made him smile. The planning was meticulous, fueled by a nervous energy that kept me awake for nights. I meticulously checked flight times, reviewed the address he'd given me countless times. The one he'd even scribbled on the back of a postcard early in his stay, a charming personal touch I'd cherished. I wanted everything to be perfect. I wanted to see his face light up, to feel his genuine surprise, to melt into his embrace and erase the creeping doubt that had begun to consume me. The journey itself was a blur of nervous anticipation. The sterile efficiency of the airport, the endless security lines, the drone of the airplane engines. I tried to sleep, but my mind raced, replaying our last few strained conversations, dissecting his words, searching for clues. Was this a mistake? Was I being paranoid? Or was this the only way to truly know? A tight knot formed in my stomach, a physical manifestation of my swirling anxieties. When I finally stepped off the plane at Heathrow, the cold air hit me first, sharp and invigorating. Then came the smell, a faint, earthy scent of rain and damp asphalt, mixed with something distinctly European, a blend of exhaust and old stone. It was a new world, unfamiliar and daunting, yet also exhilarating. The iconic red double-decker buses, the hurried chatter of different languages, the ceaseless energy of a major global city. A good kind of nervous excitement bubbled within me, the thrill of reunion mingling with a growing cold apprehension that coiled deeper than I cared to admit. I hailed a black cab, the driver a friendly, talkative man with a thick London accent. I gave him the address Daniel had provided, the one etched into my memory, the one that supposedly housed his dreams. As the taxi wove through the narrow streets, past historic landmarks and bustling markets, my heart hammered against my ribs. Each turn brought me closer to the truth, whatever it might be. The city lights blurred into streaks of color, mirroring the chaotic mix of hope and fear swirling inside me. Finally, the cab pulled up in front of a small, unassuming brick building. It looked exactly as Daniel had described it. Modest, quiet, tucked away on a tree-lined street. My breath hitched in my throat. This was it. The culmination of a year of sacrifice, of faith, of long-distance love. I paid the driver, my hands trembling slightly as I clutched my small bag. I walked up the short pathway, the bricks damp underfoot, and pushed open the heavy front door. Inside, the hallway was dimly lit, smelling faintly of dust and old wood. I found the number of Daniel's apartment, apartment 2B, emblazoned on a tarnished brass plate. My heart accelerated, a frantic drum solo against my ribs. My palm felt slick with sweat as I raised my hand. I pressed the doorbell. Once. A clear, insistent chime that echoed through the quiet corridor. I waited, straining to hear any movement from within. A shuffle, a cough, anything. Nothing. I pressed it again, longer this time, my thumb aching. Still no response. My initial surge of hope began to recede, replaced by a cold dread that spread through my veins. Maybe he was just out. At the library, perhaps. But no, it was late afternoon. He usually called around this time. I tried a third time, a fourth, a fifth, leaning my ear against the cool wood of the door, desperate for a sign of life. The silence, thick and heavy, was the only answer. Just as a knot of panic began to tighten in my chest, a door down the hall creaked open. An elderly woman with kind, inquisitive eyes, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, peered out. "Can I help you, dear?" she asked, her voice soft, laced with a familiar British lilt. "Yes," I stammered, trying to compose myself, to force a reassuring smile. "I'm looking for Daniel. Daniel Whitmore. He lives here, apartment 2B. I pointed uncertainly at the door. She looked at me, her brow furrowing in confusion. Her gaze was gentle, but her words were a hammer blow. "My dear," she said, her voice laced with genuine concern, "no one by that name lives here. Hasn't for a very long time, actually. A young couple, a lovely Asian family. They've been in 2B for over a year now." The air in the hallway suddenly felt thin, impossible to breathe. My laugh, when it escaped, was a strangled, pathetic sound, devoid of humor. "Oh, I must have gotten the address wrong," I mumbled, my mind scrambling for an explanation, any explanation. "I'm so sorry, I must have written it down incorrectly." I fumbled in my bag, pulling out my phone, pretending to check. But I knew. I knew with a chilling certainty that the address was correct. It was the same one he had written, in his distinctive, elegant handwriting, on that cherished postcard months ago. The postcard I still kept tucked away in my bedside drawer. It was then that the London cold, which had initially been sharp and exhilarating, ceased to be just about the weather. It seeped into my bones, a deep, pervasive chill that had nothing to do with the outside temperature. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely unlock my phone. I scrolled through my contacts, my thumb hovering over his name. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I pressed call. The ringing felt interminable, each tone echoing the emptiness in my chest. And then he answered. "Karen, I love. Is everything okay?" His voice, usually so smooth and calm, was strained, a little breathless, as if he'd been running. Or startled. "Yes," I managed, my voice a brittle whisper. "Only, I'm here. In London." Silence. Long dense. A suffocating vacuum that swallowed every ambient sound, every beat of my frantic heart. It stretched on, an eternity measured in unspoken truths. I could practically hear his mind racing, conjuring excuses, scrambling for a way out. And then his voice, barely a whisper, cold and utterly devoid of the warmth I had known. I need to go, okay? I'll call you right back." The line went dead. The click was sharp, final, slicing through the last vestiges of my hope. He never called back. The truth, brutal and unforgiving, settled over me like a shroud. My intuition hadn't been screaming for nothing. It had been trying to warn me. And I, blinded by love and a desperate desire to believe, had ignored it until it was too late. The silence from that London hallway, from that phone call, would haunt me for a long, long time. It was the sound of my world collapsing. The sharp click of the phone disconnecting in London was not just the end of a call. It was the severing of a lifeline, the implosion of a year-long dream. The silence that followed was a physical entity, pressing down on me, stealing my breath. I stood there in the dimly lit hallway of that anonymous brick building, the polite confusion of the elderly neighbor echoing in my ears, the cold seeping deeper into my bones than any mere drizzle could account for. My legs felt like lead, my mind a frantic, empty echo chamber. The flight back to the United States was a blur of recycled air and muted panic. I remember very little of it. I moved through the airports, through customs, through the endless corridors, like a ghost, a shell of the woman who had left just days before. My body was present, but my mind was adrift, grappling with the impossible, refusing to fully process the sheer scale of what had just happened. Every thought was a broken shard of glass, cutting deeper. No one by that name lives here. I'll call you right back. The words replayed on a loop, a cruel, mocking soundtrack to my journey home. I stared out the airplane window, the clouds below a vast, indifferent canvas, reflecting nothing of the storm raging inside me. Sleep offered no escape. Every attempt to close my eyes brought Daniel's strained voice, the chilling finality of his hang-up. Once home, my apartment felt alien, cold, empty. The scent of coffee from Daniel's last visit, the framed photo of us smiling brightly by the lake. They were all suddenly tainted, poisoned by the bitter taste of betrayal. The days that followed blurred into a miserable, unyielding continuum of silence. My phone became an extension of my hand, a cruel instrument of torture. Called him. Dozens of times. My finger hovered over his contact, pressing, hoping, praying for a miracle. Each unanswered ring, each ping to his voicemail, was a fresh wound. My messages, meticulously crafted, then angrily typed, then simply pleading, went unread, undelivered. I sent emails, long, desperate letters detailing my hurt, my confusion, my utter bewilderment. Nothing. Not a single word, not a single explanation, not a single syllable of regret. I tried to construct rational explanations. Asterisk, he's scared. He's embarrassed. He's in some kind of trouble he can't tell me about, asterisk, but the rational part of my brain was losing the battle. The intuition, that gut feeling I had suppressed for months, now screamed at full volume, relentless and unforgiving. He wasn't scared, he was gone. He wasn't embarrassed, he was a coward. He wasn't in trouble, I was. I was the one left with a gaping hole in my heart, an empty bank account, and a sense of profound, soul-crushing stupidity. I barely ate, barely slept. My usually vibrant apartment became a tomb. I'd sit for hours, staring blankly at the wall, my mind replaying every conversation, every gesture, every moment of our year together. Was it all a lie? Every loving word, every shared dream, every promise. The thought was a physical sickness, turning my stomach, making my head throb. The money, the 3,000 euros I had sent religiously every month, the extra shifts I'd pulled, the sacrifices I'd made. It all felt like hot, searing ash. I had poured my resources, my energy, my very soul into funding a ghost. After nearly a week of this self-imposed purgatory, a grim determination settled over me. I couldn't live in this limbo, this agonizing vacuum of unanswered questions. I needed answers, concrete, undeniable facts, even if they shattered me completely. There was only one place left to go, one last thread to pull. Daniel's parents. Richard and Margaret Whitmore. They lived a few hours' drive away, in a quiet, unassuming town nestled in the heart of rural Pennsylvania. A place Daniel had always seemed keen to escape. The drive was long, the landscape blurring outside my window. The gentle rolling hills and quaint farmhouses felt starkly at odds with the turmoil in my heart. I remembered meeting them for dinner once, early in my relationship with Daniel. Richard, a retired factory worker, had been gruff but kind, his hands calloused from years of labor. Margaret, a homemaker, had been quiet, observant, with a warmth that peeked through her reserved demeanor. They were simple, honest people. How could they have raised a son capable of such a deception? The question gnawed at me with every mile. As I pulled up to their modest, well-maintained house, a knot tightened in my stomach. The sight of their familiar porch swing, the neatly trimmed hedges, the old Ford pickup in the driveway. It was all so normal, so grounding, so utterly incongruous with the chaos I was about to unleash. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drum against the silence of the afternoon. This wasn't just about Daniel anymore. It was about confronting the crumbling edifice of my entire reality. I took a deep breath, trying to compose myself to appear strong or at least coherent. I walked up to the front door, the wooden steps creaking under my weight, and knocked. The sound felt deafening in the quiet afternoon. A moment later, Margaret opened the door. Her eyes, usually so placid, widened in shock the moment she saw me. "Karen!" she exclaimed, her voice a surprised whisper, her hand flying to her chest. Richard appeared behind her, wiping his hands on a rag. His brow furrowed in confusion. He looked startled, as if I were a phantom appearing on their doorstep. "Karen, what on earth?" Richard began, his eyes scanning my face, clearly picking up on my distress. "Hello, Margaret." "Richard," I managed, my voice feeling strangely detached, as if it belonged to someone else. I need to talk to you. It's about Daniel." Their faces instantly clouded. A flicker of worry, perhaps even recognition, passed between them. They led me into their small, comfortable living room, filled with family photos and worn furniture. The air was thick with unspoken questions. Margaret fussed, offering me a cup of tea, her movements a little too quick, a little too nervous. Richard sat heavily in his armchair, his gaze fixed on me, a deep crease forming between his brows. The silence of Daniel's disconnected phone call, the hollow echo of the elderly neighbor's words. They were a relentless assault. My return to the United States was a numb blur, days dissolving into an agonizing cycle of unanswered calls and ignored messages. Daniel had vanished, leaving me adrift in a sea of unanswered questions and profound humiliation. The comfortable rhythm of my life was shattered, replaced by a suffocating emptiness. I barely ate, barely slept, lost in a labyrinth of what-ifs and how could have been so blind. Finally, after a week of this agonizing limbo, a cold, hard resolve crystallized within me. I needed answers, not theories. There was one last place to turn: Daniel's parents, Richard and Margaret Whitmore, in their quiet Pennsylvania home. I drove there, the familiar landscape doing little to calm the storm raging inside me. They were simple, honest people. Surely they could shed some light on their son's monstrous deception. Margaret opened the door, her eyes widening in shock. Richard, always the stoic, looked equally stunned. As I recounted my London trip, the empty apartment, Daniel's abrupt hang-up, their faces contorted with a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. Richard, his voice rough with disbelief, revealed Daniel had dropped out of his master's months ago, without telling anyone. My world tilted. Months. While I was still sending him thousands. Then Margaret, her voice trembling with shame, delivered the final devastating blow. He met someone in London," she whispered, her eyes brimming. "An American girl, an exchange student. When she went back to the States, he followed her. Her name is Emily Rhodes." Richard added that Daniel had told Emily he lived off investments. My investments. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I had unknowingly funded Daniel's entire charade, his fake academic life and his new relationship, all while believing I was investing in our future. The betrayal was an open wound, raw and bleeding. A cold, unforgiving determination took hold. I left their house, their apologies and Margaret's tears fading into the background, and drove straight to Emily Rhodes's address, which Margaret in her shame had provided. Daniel's silver sedan was in the driveway. He was here. I walked up to the door, my hand trembling, but my voice when it came was steady, almost unnervingly calm. Emily Rhodes, no older than 25, opened the door. Her expression was sweet, confused, utterly innocent of the deception she was entangled in. She had no idea. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice soft. "Yes, I believe you can," I replied, my gaze fixed on her. "My name is Karen Sullivan, and I'm looking for Daniel Whitmore." Her confusion deepened. "Daniel. He lives here." Is everything okay? I took a deep breath, pushing down the rising tide of emotion. Everything is far from okay, Emily. For the past year, Daniel has been in a relationship with me, telling me he was in London pursuing a master's degree. I watched her face, seeing the subtle shift from confusion to dawning disbelief. A master's that never existed. He dropped out months ago. Emily's face paled, clutching the doorframe. What? No, that's not true. He said he finished his degree. He told me he's an investor. Her voice was a desperate whisper. The investments you're referring to were actually payments I sent him, I continued, pressing on with relentless surgical precision. 3,000 euros a month for an entire year. To cover his rent, his food, his tuition. While in reality he was living with you under a completely false pretense, funded by my life savings. Her face went utterly ashen, her eyes wide with horror, darting behind me as if expecting Daniel to materialize and refute my claims. She didn't have to say a word. Her expression was a testament to the magnitude of the lie, the unimaginable betrayal. I watched as her entire world, built on Daniel's falsehoods, visibly crumbled. She said no more. There was nothing left to say. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the doorway, her life irrevocably shattered. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew with a chilling certainty that Daniel's cozy life with Emily was over. And indeed, I later learned through a mutual acquaintance that very same day, Emily had thrown Daniel out. The immediate satisfaction was fleeting, quickly replaced by a profound hollowness. The rage was still there, but it was a cold, quiet anger simmering beneath the surface. I spent the next few days in a fog, trying to digest the avalanche of betrayal. My apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison. One afternoon, in a desperate attempt to reclaim some semblance of control, I started going through the remnants of Daniel's presence in my apartment. A small box in the back of my closet, filled with what I had once considered precious keepsakes. My fingers brushed against something hard, wrapped in a soft cotton handkerchief. It was an old watch. A masculine model, with a worn leather strap and a subtly cracked dial. Daniel had always spoken of this watch with immense pride, his eyes lighting up with an almost childish reverence. It was my grandfather's, he'd told me, then my father's. It's the only thing from our family that has any real value. He would periodically take it out, polish the glass, wind it with a tender touch. It was a tangible link to his past, a symbol of his lineage. And, ironically, it truly was. A cold, calculating thought began to form in my mind. Value. Real value. I drove to a reputable antique dealer, the watch clutched tightly in my hand. The appraiser, a meticulous man, examined it carefully. After a tense 20 minutes, he looked up, a faint smile on his lips. "This is quite a piece, ma'am," he said respectfully. "A rare Swiss movement, late 1940s. It's been beautifully restored once, but the original mechanism is intact, very well preserved. A genuine collector's item." He named a figure. It wasn't enough to cover the thousands of euros I had lost. Not even close. It wouldn't even dent the emotional damage. But it was a significant sum. And in that moment it felt like the universe, in its own darkly ironic way, had decided to offer me a small, symbolic recompense. A bitter, yet tangible, form of justice. "I'd like to sell it," I said, the words coming out with a chilling certainty. The transaction was swift. I walked out of that shop with a check in my hand, a strange sense of quiet triumph mixed with a lingering ache of betrayal. I didn't tell Daniel. He didn't deserve to know. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a unilateral act. I carefully folded the receipt for the sale and tucked it deep inside a forgotten book on my shelf. It was a secret, a weapon, a silent promise to myself that this wasn't the end of my story. This was simply the beginning of my retribution. The game wasn't over. It had just changed players. I started at the beginning, recounting my surprise trip to London, the address, the kind neighbor, the empty apartment. I told them about Daniel's phone call, his breathless voice, the abrupt hang-up, the subsequent radio silence. As I spoke, the color drained from Margaret's face. Richard's jaw tightened, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the arms of his chair. They listened in stunned silence, their expressions morphing from confusion to disbelief, then to a dawning, terrible realization. "London," Richard finally rasped, his voice rough with shock. But he hasn't been in London." My head snapped up. "What do you mean, he hasn't been in London?" "He's been there for a year, doing his master's." The words tumbled out, laced with a desperation that bordered on hysteria. Margaret averted her eyes, looking at her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Karen. Daniel, he dropped out of his master's months ago," she confessed, her voice barely audible, thick with shame. "He didn't tell us either. Said he was taking a break, needed to rethink things. He stayed in London for a while after that. We didn't know what he was doing exactly. He just said he needed space." The floor beneath me felt like it had dissolved. Months. He'd dropped out months ago, while I was still meticulously wiring him money for tuition, for rent, for living expenses. The scale of the deception widened, swallowing me whole. And he had stayed in London for a while. Doing what exactly? Living off my money while pretending to be a diligent student. "He came back," Richard added, his voice low, heavy with disappointment. "A few weeks ago, actually. Said he needed to figure things out. He's been staying with a friend." He was back. In the same country. Probably within driving distance. And he still hadn't contacted me? The betrayal was a physical blow, punching the air from my lungs. The weight of his silence, the callousness of his ghosting, suddenly made brutal sense. But the worst, the truly devastating part, was yet to come. Margaret, her eyes brimming with unshed tears, her voice a tremulous whisper, finally broke the dam. She twisted her wedding ring, her gaze fixed on some distant, invisible point. There's something else, Karen. We only found out recently ourselves." She took a shaky breath, clearly struggling to articulate the words. He met someone in London. An American girl. An exchange student." My world tilted on its axis. My breath caught in my throat, a choked sob that never fully escaped. My blood ran cold, colder than any London rain. "When she went back to the States," Margaret continued, her voice cracking, "he followed her. He's with her now. She's called Emily. Emily Rhodes." The name hung in the air, a cruel, unwelcome echo. Emily Rhodes. Younger. An exchange student. My mind raced, piecing together the fragments, the unspoken truths. While I was sending €3,000 a month, believing the man I loved was tirelessly pursuing a master's degree, he was living a double life. He wasn't just lying. He was actively building a new life with someone else, using my hard-earned money to do it. The cynical icing on this bitter cake arrived next. Richard, shaking his head slowly, muttered. He told her he lived off investments. Said he was a private investor. Investments. My investments. The carefully budgeted euros I sent each month, meticulously accounted for in his fake spreadsheets. He hadn't just betrayed my trust and my love. He had weaponized my generosity, fabricating an entire identity, a lifestyle, a new relationship, all at my expense. He had used my love as his personal ATM, financing his deception, his new life, his new girlfriend. The ground did not just disappear. It crumbled beneath my feet, leaving me dangling in a void of utter shock and profound disorientation. The sheer audacity, the cold-hearted calculation of it all, was breathtaking. Humiliation washed over me, hot and stinging, followed by a searing rage that ignited in my gut. I had not only been played, I had been annihilated. The Karen Sullivan who had flown to London full of nervous hope was gone, replaced by a shell-shocked woman staring at the wreckage of her own misplaced faith. I had poured my heart and soul, and every spare penny, into a man who was nothing more than a meticulously crafted illusion. The pain was not just emotional, It was a deep, aching void, a physical hollowness where love and trust had once resided. The full, bitter taste of his betrayal choked me. And yet, even then, the worst part was still to come. 2 months. 2 long months had passed since the earth-shattering revelations at Daniel's parents' home and the subsequent, brutal confrontation with Emily. Those months had been a strange kind of purgatory, a slow, arduous process of excavating myself from the rubble of Daniel's lies. The initial shock had given way to a deep, simmering anger, which in turn had begun to calcify into something colder, harder, more resolute. I had picked through the fragments of my shattered trust, meticulously examining each piece, learning from the sharp edges. The check from the sale of the watch sat in my bank account, a tangible symbol of a small, hard-won victory, a quiet promise of further, if not financial, then emotional retribution. I was rebuilding piece by painstaking piece, but the scars were fresh, still aching. My apartment, once haunted by the ghost of Daniel's imagined presence, slowly began to feel like my own again. I removed every photograph, every small memento. The scent of his coffee, which had lingered for so long, finally dissipated. The silence was no longer heavy with his absence, but light with my growing independence. I had thought I was finally closing the door on that painful chapter, ready to move forward, scarred but stronger. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, as I was working on a design project at my kitchen table, a sudden, insistent knock echoed through my apartment. My heart, still jumpy from the year of emotional warfare, lurched. No one ever just knocked. Friends called, deliveries buzzed. This was different. A prickle of unease ran down my spine, quickly followed by a strange, almost anticipatory calm. I walked to the door, peering through the peephole. And there he was. Daniel. He looked different. Bashed, haggard even. His usual confident posture was slumped. His shoulders bowed. His eyes, once so bright and captivating, now held a sort of dull, defeated sheen, though I could see a desperate, practiced earnestness fighting to surface. His hair was a little longer, unkempt, his face thinner, etched with shadows that spoke of restless nights. In his hand, he clutched a bouquet of flowers. Not the expensive, carefully chosen blooms he used to bring, but a rather sad, wilted bunch of grocery store carnations, their colors faded, almost apologetic. It was the physical embodiment of a man who had hit rock bottom, or at least wanted to appear that way. Every detail, from the slightly rumpled shirt to the carefully orchestrated sigh, screamed rehearsed regret. I didn't open the door immediately. I just watched him through the lens, a silent observer of his pathetic performance. He looked around nervously, shifting his weight, then raised his hand to knock again, a little softer this time, as if testing the waters. I unlocked the deadbolt, the click loud in the sudden quiet, and slowly opened the door, leaving the security chain latched. I kept my face blank, devoid of any emotion, any hint of the turbulent past we shared. His eyes, already weary, widened slightly as they met mine. "Karen," he breathed, his voice a low, gravelly whisper, laced with what he hoped was tenderness. "Oh, Karen." He took a hesitant step forward, the cheap flowers dangling. Can I come in? Please." I said nothing, merely raising an eyebrow, my gaze unwavering. The silence stretched, uncomfortable for him, empowering for me. He fidgeted, clearing his throat. I know I messed up. Badly. Karen, I've been a fool. A complete and utter fool." He tried to meet my eyes, but his gaze kept sliding away, unable to hold the directness of mine. This was his old routine, the charming vulnerability he'd perfected. But now it was a faded copy, a poorly executed pantomime. He launched into his monologue, a torrent of carefully chosen words that flowed with a desperate, practiced ease. "I've been lost, Karen. So incredibly lost. Everything in London. It just overwhelmed me. The pressure, the loneliness. I spiraled. I made terrible mistakes, I know. Unforgivable ones. But it was never about you, Karen. Never. You were the only good thing, the only steady compass in my life. I was just struggling. trying to find my way back to myself. He paused, probably expecting a reaction, a flicker of sympathy. But I remained impassive, my expression a carefully constructed wall. I listened, truly listened, but not with my heart. I listened with the cold, analytical part of my brain, dissecting each phrase, recognizing the familiar patterns of manipulation, the subtle deflections, the complete absence of genuine accountability. He wasn't lost. He was calculated. He wasn't struggling. He was exploiting. The words were just noise, empty vessels devoid of sincerity. I ended things with Emily, he continued, his voice dropping, as if sharing a secret confidence. Immediately. As soon as I realized what I had done, how deeply I had hurt you. She meant nothing. It was a distraction, a pathetic attempt to numb the pain of my own failure. You were always the one, Karen. You always have been. The real love of my life. He took another step, pressing closer to the chain door, extending the wilted flowers slightly. His eyes, glistening with what looked like unshed tears, pleaded with me. This was the crescendo of his act, the emotional appeal designed to break down my defenses. I've changed, Karen. I swear it. These past 2 months, without you, without anyone, I've had so much time to think, to reflect. I see things clearly now. I want to make it right. I want to earn back your trust, to rebuild what we had. Please, just give me another chance. I love you, Karen. I truly, deeply love you. I held his gaze, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I truly saw him, stripped bare of the illusion I had built around him. The man standing before me was not the charismatic, ambitious Daniel I had fallen in love with. He was a hollow echo, a desperate actor trying to convince an audience that had long since seen through his poorly crafted script. There was no flicker of the old affection, no lingering warmth in my chest. My heart was a stone, cold and unyielding. The love I once felt for him had not just died. It had been incinerated, leaving behind only a bitter ash. And then a small, cold smile touched my lips. It wasn't a kind smile or a warm one. It was a smile born of complete emotional detachment, of a calculating satisfaction that had taken 2 months to hone. It was the smile of someone who had won, not a battle, but a war of attrition. You know, Daniel, I began, my voice clear, steady, cutting through his desperate pleas like a sharp blade. Each word was carefully placed, imbued with a quiet power. Maybe your master's in London actually was worth it. His brow furrowed slightly, a flicker of confusion replacing the practiced remorse in his eyes. He didn't quite grasp the irony, not yet. Karen, what are you talking about? I told you I dropped out, I failed. Because, I continued, cutting him off, my smile widening almost imperceptibly, at least now, you've finally learned how much it truly costs to lie to someone who only wanted your good. My gaze was unwavering, piercing through the last remnants of his facade. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a verdict. The color drained from his already pale face. His jaw, which had been set in a posture of earnest plea, slackened. He lowered his gaze, speechless, the forced sincerity in his eyes replaced by a dawning comprehension of the trap he had walked into. He stood there, mute, shoulders slumped, the cheap flowers a pathetic prop in his defeated hand. He was cornered, exposed, with nowhere left to hide. He knew, in that moment, that his manipulation had failed. I let the silence hang for a beat, letting my words sink in, letting the full weight of the truth press down on him. This wasn't enough. Not yet. I had one more piece to play, one final, precise blow. With the same calm, detached tone of someone closing a balance sheet, of settling an account with finality, I added, "Oh, and just so you know." He looked up, a flicker of desperate hope, a fleeting wish that I might be offering a reprieve. His eyes met mine, wary, confused. I sold your grandfather's watch. The effect was instantaneous, devastating. His face went utterly ashen, a ghost of the man who had stood there moments before. His eyes, previously dull with rehearsed regret, now widened in absolute raw horror. A guttural sound, half gasp, half choked sob caught in his throat. He stumbled backward, dropping the wilted flowers to the ground, scattering petals on my doorstep. "What?" he croaked, his voice barely a whisper, a genuine tremor running through it. You sold the watch. My grandfather's watch." The disbelief, the shock, the sheer, unadulterated pain in his voice was real this time. For the first time, I saw genuine emotion, a chink in his armor that no amount of acting could disguise. It was the one thing, the only thing, that had truly held real value to him. "Yes," I confirmed, my voice unwavering, devoid of any sympathy. "It was the only thing with any real value that you left behind. Consider it a symbolic reimbursement." He stood frozen, utterly speechless, his mouth agape. His eyes fixed on me in a mixture of disbelief and utter devastation. The proud family heirloom, the symbol of his lineage, gone. Taken by the woman he had so carelessly discarded, so cruelly deceived. He had lost everything that day, and it was a quiet, profound victory. I met his gaze for a final moment, a flicker of bitter satisfaction passing through me. Then, without another word, without a backward glance, I slowly and deliberately closed the door. The heavy click of the lock resonated through the silence, a final, definitive period at the end of a very long, very painful chapter. He was outside and I was inside. My space, my life, reclaimed. The game was truly over. And this time I had walked away not just intact but finally truly free. The echo of the closing door still resonates within me. A final, definitive period at the end of a very long, very painful chapter. He was outside, stripped bare of his pretenses, and I was inside, not just in my home, but within myself again. The ghost of Daniel, of the love I thought we shared, finally vanquished. The silence that followed was no longer heavy with his absence, but light with my growing independence, my hard-won peace. The watch, his cherished heirloom, was gone, replaced by a tangible sum that, while not erasing the financial loss, certainly balanced the scales of poetic justice. It was a reclaiming, a small act of defiance that severed the last thread of his influence. This journey, this unwinding of a fabricated love, has taught me that sometimes the most profound betrayals are cloaked in the most charming guises. That the deepest wounds are inflicted not by outright enemies, but by those we trust with our most vulnerable selves. It taught me the devastating cost of a lie, not just for the one who tells it, but for the one who, in their earnest belief, unwittingly funds it. But more importantly, it taught me the power of my own intuition, the quiet wisdom that whispers when something is amiss. And it taught me the strength to reclaim my narrative, to close the door not just on a man, but on a version of myself that was too willing to believe in fantasies. The scars remain, a permanent reminder, but they are no longer bleeding. They have hardened, shaping a more resilient, discerning Karen. I wonder, after hearing my story, what would you have done in my place when Daniel appeared at your door? Would you have let him in, given him another chance? Or would you have found your own way to balance the ledger? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if my story has resonated with you, if you found yourself holding your breath with me, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to my side of the story. Your support helps me continue sharing these deeply personal journeys.